Good morning. The hearing board of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is in session. Today is Tuesday, May 15th, 2018, and the time is approximately 9:05 a.m. We are meeting in the hearing board room in Diamond Bar. We have one change to the calendar today, and that is SCAQMD versus ENS 555 Corporation, case number 6104-1 for an order for abatement is off calendar. And we have one matter to be heard this morning, and that is the City of Rialto and Veolia Water West Operating Services, case number 6105-1 for a short variance. And who is representing the City of Rialto today?
Your Honor, this is Peter McGaugh. I'm an attorney for Veolia. Veolia is here, and the city attorney for the City of Rialto is here as well, but I will be speaking on behalf of the variance.
Thank you. Let me remind everyone to please silence your cell phones. And can you please, Mr. McGaugh, can you spell your name for the record?
MC, capital G-A-W. First name Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGaugh. And who is representing the executive officer today?
Daphne, Super Executive Officer.
Thank you, Ms. Sue. And I'm going to ask, before we take opening statements, I'm going to ask everyone who plans to testify today as a witness to please rise to be sworn in. Please raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Just for the record and so everyone knows, we are a 4-member board today. Our medical member, Dr. Lerner, was unable to make it today, and his alternate was also similarly unavailable. But we do have a quorum, so we will proceed. Mr. McGaugh, would you like to start with an opening statement, please?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to apologize to the board for being late. My flight was delayed, and thank you for being patient with us.
You're not that late.
I'd also like to thank Air District staff and the hearing board staff. They have been very accommodating and helpful throughout this process. It's really made it a lot easier for us, and as a result, I think we have come up with some stipulated, agreed-upon conditions to the short variance, which should keep this hearing relatively simple. We're here today because the wastewater treatment plant for the City of Rialto has an anaerobic digester, which is a piece of equipment, holds about 1 million gallons, and it treats wastewater and sewage with microbes, biological organisms. It is not a science, it is more of an art, keeping this thing in balance. They use loading, they use some chemicals to balance out what's going on, but at the end of the day, it's the microbes that control whether we digest sewage or not. We recently had an upset of the digester, which is where the microbes, the balance switches for sometimes known reasons, sometimes unknown reasons. In this particular case, it seems that there were a number of factors that happened to coincide. We had the clarifier, which is the first piece of equipment. It had been offline due to a plugged pipe and needed some repairs. So that was coming online. There was a power failure as a result of some vandalism next door that took the power out from the plant for a while. We don't know that that actually contributed to the upset, but it was something we can't eliminate as a cause. And then we were introducing, it's called FOG. It stands for fat, oils, and grease. It's stuff that doesn't actually make it down the sewer because it coagulates, coalesces, and causes sewer blockages, so it has to be taken out and trucked in separately. And so we were introducing, putting the primary clarifier back online over time, introducing FOG and a number of other factors, and without knowing it was going to happen, we had an upset which caused the hydrogen sulfide being generated in the digester to rise. We identified it. We immediately responded with chemical treatment. We notified the Air District. They've been involved with us every step of the way. They've been very helpful and accommodating, as I said. And we now have the digester, so it's back down under our 5 pound per day hydrogen sulfide limit, but the digester is not healthy yet. It's still in recovery. It's recovering its balance between the microorganisms and the food source for the microorganisms. That takes a while because they're biologic organisms. So we're here today not because we're in violation, but because we don't have a healthy digester yet, and there's always a potential that we will go back into violation as the digester recovers. Things happen. Things go into the digester. We don't control what comes in through the sewers all the time. We don't control what comes into the sewers at all. And so digesters can be finicky, particularly when they're in recovery. So that's why we're asking for this variance to be extended. We had the emergency variance. It expires as of today, and through this hearing, we're asking that it simply be extended for 90 days so we can be sure we have a healthy digester going forward.
Thank you, Mr. McGaugh. One thing that you mentioned, and if I can ask you to have witnesses elaborate on this when the time comes, you mentioned that there is a potential for violation, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the 6 findings we need to make, but we do need to make a finding that either you are in violation or you will be. So if a witness can elaborate on the potential for that, et cetera, that will be very helpful.
Yeah, and Mr. Mansell, who is the chief plant operator, will do so when
we're at that point.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sue, your opening.
Good morning. The district does not oppose the facility's petition for a short variance. The district proposes conditions which the facility has stipulated to, which assist the district in continuing to monitor the situation on a daily basis and requires the facility to demonstrate the digester operation is in a steady condition before introducing fats, oil, and grease into the digester. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Sue, I understand that you were the one who disseminated new proposed short variance conditions on behalf of the executive officer?
Correct.
Okay, so then we will mark this as Exhibit A, the proposed short variance conditions, and there are 11 of them. Hearing board members, would you like to take a moment before we begin? Let's do that. Let's take five minutes to review the proposed short variance conditions before we continue on with any witness testimony. So we'll go off the record for 5 minutes. We're back on the record. Mr. McGall, you may present your first witness, please. And if you can ask your witness to state and spell their name, tell us their title, and also state for the record whether they took the oath this morning.
Mr. Mansell?
Okay. Good morning. Clarence Mansell. That's CLARENCEMANSELL, General Manager for Veolia Rialto Project. And I did take the oath this morning.
Thank you. Mr. Mansell, could you just explain to the board why we're here? We're here because we're either in violation or we will be in violation. And as I explained earlier, we're not in violation right now. We're hoping to not be in violation, but there is a possibility, it's not just a possibility, there's a chance that we'll be in violation. Just if you could explain to the board why it is.
Yes. The digestion process is a biological process, as you've heard. And if you think of it like our stomach, because in wastewater treatment, oftentimes we try to emulate natural processes, and the digester is like your stomach. And it's just like you're eating, and sometimes you change your diet, and which we did. And that was forced on us by a equipment breakdown, and that diet changed. And so the digester went into imbalance. Although we believe that we have it under control, there is always a possibility of a relapse, because at this point in time, the digester is not well, and we're maintaining this condition with chemicals. So we want the digester to return to a point where it's naturally producing the alkalinity that it should be producing. The pH has come back up to a normal range, and then we can use less chemical to control the undesired constituents. But at this time, it's taking chemical addition. So it's taking intervention to make the digester produce what we want it to do.
And Clarence, even with that intervention, can you assure us that that digester is not going to go back into upset condition?
We're very confident in our abilities, but we don't control nature, and so therefore we could have a relapse.
So if the digester were healthy and balanced, that could occur too, but that would be less of a concern because you have ways of anticipating and controlling that.
That's correct.
But because the digester is sick, out of balance,
Right.
returning, it can be influenced more dramatically by what would otherwise be normal inputs. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm just going to go down the list, and if the board has any questions, Mr. Mansell is certainly here to answer them as well.
The way we'll do it is you go ahead with your direct testimony. I'm going to ask Ms. Sue if she has any questions on behalf of the district, and then the board will ask questions after.
Thank you. Okay. Now, when the upset first arose, was the wastewater treatment plant able to take steps to reduce or minimize the consequences?
We did take steps, but they were not enough.
Just give me some idea of the kind of steps that were available that you did take.
The first thing that we do in terms of noticing that the sulfur content was continuing to rise and that we needed to add more chemical, so we added more chemical, inordinately high amounts of chemical. At the same time, we stopped receiving. One of the things you want to do with a stomach is you want to feed it less, and so we stopped the delivery of fats, oils, and grease, trying to allow it to, help it return to a balance while we were using chemicals to manage the process.
If at any time, Mr. McGall, you need a moment off the record, you may take it and ask for it.
Thank you. We may need a break, but maybe after Mr. Mansell finishes would be fine. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
I see.
if I may. My name is Fred Galante. On behalf of the city, I'm city attorney of the city of Rialto. We are the owner of the facility. Veolia is operating it. Our interest would be to get a historical perspective from the actual plant operator, Richard Perna, who's here today. So we'd like to hear testimony from him because he is the representative who has the background and as the plant operator would know on a going forward basis the plan.
Can I have you come to a microphone? And can you restate your name? And then I'm going to ask you if you'd like to sit at council's table and represent the city.
Yes, my apologies. Again, my name
I don't know if the microphone is on. You need to make sure that. And please, I don't know if someone did not silence their cell phones. Please make sure your cell phones are silenced. Thank you.
My apologies. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Fred Galante. I'm city attorney for the city of Rialto. Galante is Galante. City attorney for the city of Rialto, the owner of the facility.
And Mr. Galante, are you, so to speak, co-counsel with Mr. McGaw, or would you like the opportunity to separately question each witness as well?
My interest is not to question the witness. I wouldn't say I'm co-counsel. We're the owner of the facility, so we have an interest, obviously, in the outcome of these proceedings. And from our perspective, we believe the plant operator has that firsthand knowledge. So we'd like to have his testimony be part of the record.
Okay. And Mr. McGaw, you plan to call that witness?
To the extent he's here and he's available, so we can bring him in if there are questions following Mr. Mansell's testimony. But Mr. Mansell is the chief plant operator, the general manager of the plant, and he's certainly familiar with the circumstances that gave rise to this.
Okay, so we'll keep in mind if we have any questions for the owner or to get a different perspective, we'll make sure we know that we have that witness.
Yes, thank you.
And Mr. McGaw, you may continue with Mr. Mansell's testimony.
One of the elements that the board needs to find is that we couldn't just stop operations and avoid exceedances and move forward on that point. And just explain briefly why it is we can't just turn off the wastewater treatment plant.
By nature? Is it on? Okay.
There you go, sorry.
All right. Okay. By nature, wastewater is non-deferrable. You have to take what comes in and you have to treat it. And to divert it would mean going to the environment and creating problems in the environment. So we need to treat it, and so the unit cannot be taken offline.
One of the factors is, have you considered curtailing operations? Maybe not shutting down completely, but doing something to your operations that slows down the generation of hydrogen sulfide until things get back into balance.
Correct. And we did do that, and that was the reason for stopping fog deliveries. As you know, again, looking at it as an upset stomach, you want to feed it less, and especially something that's highly volatile.
So I think as things stand now, you're under the 5 pound per day limit of H2S emissions, correct?
Correct.
But you're not feeding it fog.
We're not feeding fog.
And fog is, at the end of the day, fog is part of the normal operation of this digester. So to get it up and running, we need to get it to the point where it can accept fog again, right?
Correct.
Okay. So we are curtailing operations until we get it in balance, add the fog back in. And you'll be monitoring things as that goes, as the fog returns?
And yes, and this has happened in the past where the digester, as a stomach, gets upset and you take corrective actions. We've stopped fog deliveries in the past, allowed the digester to regain its balance, and then resume fog deliveries.
Okay. And you're continuing to dose it with the ferrous chloride, which reduces the hydrogen sulfide generation?
That's correct.
Okay. And throughout this process, I think we've had 14 days where we actually exceeded the 5 pounds per day limit. Has the Air District been involved in the process through that?
Very much. When we recognized that there was a problem, we immediately called them, We have a very good working relationship with staff. They visited the plant immediately. We had nice discussions, and it's just been a good working relationship.
And you intend to keep them in the loop as we go forward,
Yes,
including daily reporting of relevant values and monitoring, and even adding some additional monitoring?
correct.
I think we've hit all the elements. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sue, do you have any questions?
Hi, good morning. You mentioned that you have been dosing the digester with ferrous chloride. What is the percentage of ferrous ions in the current chemical that you use?
The manufacturer shoots for 14%. Using a different test methodology, when we measure, we're measuring 17, 19, 22%, but it's a different test methodology. But the manufacturer delivers 14% or more.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That was all my questions for now.
Thank you. Ms. Burr, do you have a question?
Yes, you mentioned, and this was where I was going to go before you went there, in the past, when you've had upsets, that you had delayed the delivery of fog. But what I really wanted to know is how long did it take in the past to return to natural operation with the microbes?
2 to 3 months.
2 to 3 months.
Yes.
And so there's no reason that you would expect it to be different.
We're not expecting any difference.
Okay. And then you also mentioned something about recording values and adding additional monitoring. And I'm assuming that that's in one of the conditions that's listed in Exhibit A. And I was wondering if you could tell me which one is additional, not just normal monitoring.
Okay. Number 6.
Okay, just number 6?
That's the monitoring one.
Yes. Well, I mean, I just want to make sure that you said additional.
Yes.
And I just wanted to make sure I knew which was additional. So number 6 is
Yes.
additional.
Yeah,
monitoring.
ordinarily, they don't monitor every day, and they don't run the method 307. So the fact that they're monitoring daily and adding in the method 307 on a weekly basis, that's new for the purposes of monitoring this during the short variance.
And we
Thank
need-
you.
we
And,
need the witness to-
yeah, thank you.
I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Burr,
It's okay.
If Mr. Mansell can.
I didn't want to cut you off, but we need the
can
witness to.
Please state that.
Yes. Number 6 outlines the additional testing and monitoring that we'll do. And do you have any?
I just wanted to make sure that I got it on the record with you saying it. Okay. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Mr. Camarena has questions.
Mr. Mansell, could you walk me through the events that occurred leading up to the upset?
Sure. Back, I believe it was on February 27th, one of our unit processes went down, or we had to take it out of service, and that unit process is called the primary settling tank or the primary clarification tank. That's where incoming sewage comes into that tank, and then through the process of gravity, we allow the heavier solids to settle out, and the suspended solids go on to the next process, which is an aerobic process. But the settled solids we call raw sludge, and they're septic in nature, and we feed that to the digester. But that line plugged, so we were no longer able to feed that heavier septic sludge to the digester. So that means the solids go on to the next process, which then creates increased growth in your aerobic bacteria, and this is where the imbalance comes in, the first imbalance. We're feeding all the time a certain amount of septic and a certain amount of aerobic solids to the digester. Now we're feeding all aerobic solids to the digester, and that's a change in what it's used to seeing. And it can become acclimated, but that takes time. But shortly after that, we had, well, several weeks later, but remember, this is a minimum of a 30-day cycle when you're making changes. And we had a power outage. And the power outage, how that affects you, it was short-term, but you're not mixed, because you don't have the power to keep your digester mixed. And so you can get stratification, but we remix and we're off and running, but you don't know what impact that has had. Then we got some fog deliveries that were higher in strength than normal. But we don't know that because testing doesn't reveal that until after the fact. And that higher strength solids going into the digester at the same time that you're already experiencing an imbalance, having gone to aerobic and now back to a combination of septic and aerobic solids. We're kind of jerking it around, not on purpose, but because of the failure of equipment.
On the primary clarifier, you have just one?
We have well, we actually have 4, but each unit process is a separate train. And this train handles anywhere from 50 to 60% of the process, the one that went down. So it was a significant impact on the digester.
There was not sufficient capacity in the others to,
No, there's not.
the fog deliveries. I think one of the conditions requires that you not accept fog unless and until daily emissions of sulfur.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Okay,
I
we'll stop.
apologize, we have to wait. This is a phantom ringing that happens.
It's our daily robocall. Don't answer.
You may continue.
Okay. One of the conditions requires that you not accept fog under certain conditions.
Right.
Okay. Now, knowing that you already had some solids going to the digester, problems there, the clarifier not working, why did you accept fog?
Because we hadn't had a problem in the past.
But you mean you had this exact situation where where your clarifier wasn't working, you were sending solids to the digester, and you had added fog?
On a couple of occasions, we've had to take the clarifier out of service. This time it was out of service a little longer, but we've had to take we'd taken it out, I think it was August of 2017 prior for inspection, and we'd taken it out on another occasion. But yes, we've had the same condition, but this time it was a little longer, that it was out of service.
Isn't it kind of risky to be accepting fog at a point in time when you're already having problems?
Not based on past experience.
When did you stop the fog?
The instruction was given on Monday the 16th when we realized we had a problem. There was maintenance on the system that next day, so there wouldn't have been any deliveries anyway. And then on the 18th,
Which
one
month?
truck.
Which month are you talking about?
Oh, April. I'm sorry, April. And one truck did come in on the 18th, which we did not intend for that to happen, but it did. But we made sure that the vendor knew, do not bring any trucks.
Who gave you the instruction to stop the fog?
I did on Monday,
And the reason?
the 16th.
The reason?
The reason, because the digester, we realized that the digester was out of balance. And that's an instruction that's been given by chief plant operators or myself in the past.
When did you discover the digester was out of balance?
I was made aware of it on Monday, the 16th, the same day that I gave the instruction to stop the fog deliveries.
When did you exceed the limit? The 5 pound?
The first time you said?
Yes.
Yes. We learned on Monday that it happened on Wednesday, the 11th of April.
I have no further questions at this time.
Ms. Byrd?
I just have one follow-up. I understand that the fog is picked up by vendors from outside with vehicles, correct? And when that fog is picked up to be transported to the wastewater treatment, what occurs if those vendors cannot bring that fog to the wastewater treatment?
They have multiple sources that they're delivering to, so they just divert to another source.
Okay, so it's not that it would be sitting at their facility waiting to,
No.
okay. And the advantage, is there an advantage to the city, to the wastewater treatment facility to accept fog, other than to, of course, take care of those places that are bringing it? Is there an advantage to the city's treatment itself?
Well,
It could be any, it could be environmental, it could be financial, it could be, what, is there any advantage?
there is a financial advantage,
Okay,
but there's also, in terms of your process, we like having the mix of fog in the digester because it does help with your digestion process. It's a fuel
so it serves as a fuel.
to the process.
Okay. So even though it provides that possibility of further throwing things out of line, it is a desirable component for the wastewater treatment for fuel.
Yes, eating is healthy, but sometimes you can overeat or eat the wrong thing.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple questions. I don't think we've heard, how long are you asking the short variance to go to? When are you asking it to end?
90 days.
90 days. Well, first of all, you understand that the 90 days would include the time in which you already have the ex parte.
It's my understanding that the board is limited to 90 days on a short variance, and so we would like as much time as possible to get the biology back to where it needs to be.
Okay. Can you explain to the board why 90 days is necessary? I know you have testified that in the past, it's taken about 2 to 3 months to get back into balance, but this occurred back in April. So if you can explain why you think you need 90 days.
Okay. When we got the variance, we were in the middle of the upset, and we were not on the road to recovery because we were just discovering and understanding the severity of the problem. So once we started, doing the things to try to get to on the road to recovery, and we could start seeing that the digester continued to decline. And then as of about 2 weeks ago, it kind of bottomed out, and then now it's beginning to come back. But we're still, in a precarious position, and it's still taking chemicals to do what we need done. So we need 90 days because a process cycle in a digester, our digesters, is 25 to 30 days. And so we need a couple of process cycles to get the right balance in the digester. So if you look at a cycle being 30 days, we need at least 2 cycles, and 3 is definitely better.
So you will not know if you are in full compliance until you've gone through those cycles?
There's a difference in compliance and the healthy digester. We're able to perform because we're adding chemicals. So that's why the sulfur limits, I mean, not the limit, but the sulfur content in the digester gas is down. But the digester is still unhealthy. And once we get back to a pH of 7 or more, once we get back to alkalinities above 2,500, once we get, then we can start saying the digester, and there are other factors as well, but the point is then we can say the digester is healthy and that we don't have to be dependent on as much chemical to have the digester perform.
Okay. As you just stated, being out of compliance and having a healthy digester are two separate and different things. What's the potential moving forward that you will be out of compliance for up to 90 days from now on the third cycle?
Okay. What can happen is just a natural circumstance. You're in a condition that you're not feeling well, or in this case, the digester's not feeling well, and what you could normally accept or tolerate, you might not be able to tolerate, and that's not predictable for us. So in our own process on the liquid train for getting the digester, we also have to balance the biology there. And sometimes, in order to make sure we're meeting water quality standards, we have to waste more solids to the digester to maintain balance in the liquid side of the house. And if you do that, that means you're putting more volatile solids, more volatile acids into the digester, and that will, therefore, the digester sees that as a change in its loading of food. And that's a natural thing that we go through, but in this condition, doing something what's natural could, we don't know, present a problem.
Do you normally, when you say chemicals that you're adding, is that the ferrous chloride?
Ferrous chloride and also sodium bicarbonate.
Is it usual in your process to be adding ferrous chloride and/or the other
Not the sodium
chemical?
bicarbonate at all. This is the first time we've ever had to do that. But the ferrous chloride, we would dose around 50 gallons because you need something. The digester naturally produces hydrogen sulfide, and you have to have something that ties up that sulfur. So that's the iron in the ferrous chloride. So it binds it, and it's much easier to do at low doses when the digester is healthy. When the digester is not healthy, it takes putting a lot of iron into that digester to tie up the sulfides.
So it's fair to say it's usual to put in ferrous chloride, just not to the amounts that you're putting in right now to deal with the upset condition.
Correct. Now I want to be clear, we have been reducing our dosage, but the digester still is not healthy. But we've been reducing our dosage because it's like chemotherapy. You keep adding it, it does good, but it can also do harm. So we have to have that balance as well.
I thought I read in the, and correct me if I'm incorrect, I thought I read in the petition something about the type of ferrous chloride you're using was not effective. Is that, did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly. We were believing at that time that the age of the chemical, because as chemicals sit in your storage tanks and they age, we noticed that we got to a point where we were just adding lots of chemical but not making a difference. And so at that time, and we noticed that we had been keeping this batch longer than we had kept previous batches. And so we were concerned and researching whether the efficacy, well, I won't say efficacy, in this case it's the effectiveness of the chemical had diminished. And we did call out the chemical expert, and he did tell us that we were at a point where we were not, for different reasons, but we were at a point where the chemical was not being effective. And so he made recommendations that we took to try to, which was adding the bicarbonate.
And is the district aware of the bicarbonate addition?
It's not referenced in there.
That's the sodium bicarbonate, is that
Yeah,
correct?
it's not referenced in
Okay,
there.
I'm just wondering if the district, I can ask a district witness, but are you aware of whether the district is aware of that? Because I saw nothing about that chemical being added, and whether or not they are in approval of the use of that particular chemical.
Okay. That's standard in the industry to add that chemical. We've never been in a position where we had to add it before, but it's in your manuals, in our manuals for what to do with a sick digester.
Okay. And it's a little concerning, of course, to hear that that the ferrous chloride that you were using was somewhat older in age. Have you corrected that issue and your practices moving forward to make sure that that doesn't occur again?
Yeah, we're definitely taking steps to ensure that even if we have to store chemical, that we keep it very well mixed.
Okay, thank you. Going back to the clarifier, the primary clarifier, was that breakdown something that could have been prevented? What's the maintenance like on that clarifier?
That is something that is very common across the country or just in the industry, that you're moving heavy solids and sometimes your lines will plug up. And so we do, when that happens, we flush, and the flushing doesn't work. In this case, it didn't work. Usually flushing will handle it, but it didn't handle it in this case. So we had to take the tank out of service and see the line, the entry and exit points, and work on it that way.
And I have a similar question. Mr. Camarena had asked about past times you've taken it out and still accepted fog deliveries. Have you reconsidered your policy to accept fog deliveries once the primary clarifier is in fact taken out of service?
The answer is, it's not a problem accepting the fog as long as the digester is healthy, and that's what we have to monitor and make the decision on, is the health of the digester. Not just because you take a tank out of service, you have to do all these other things. It's contingent on the health of the digester.
In this situation, though, you were not aware of the health or the upset in the digester until after the fog had been delivered. Is that correct? Or
Fog deliveries had been ongoing since, I'm not sure how long before, but they'd been ongoing. So, and again, we have been through circumstances where we have to make changes to maintain the digester's health, and we had no problems. And so this was truly, for the operators, unforeseen. Lessons learned, a lot of lessons learned.
I accept that, and I'll move off of that topic in terms of, for this particular variance, I accept that in the past that hasn't happened. I just wanted to bring up the point that in the future, were this to happen again, it would no longer be unforeseen, which is why I asked the question. I'm looking at Exhibit A, which is the proposed short variance conditions. Condition number 2, that's merely a restatement of your permit. Is that correct? You have no other place to combust the digester gas. You only have flare. Is that correct?
As a significant source, we do have boilers that are permitted, but we're not putting digester gas in the boilers. But I don't want it to be on record. We do have other places to combust gas, but we're using natural gas for those boilers right now.
Okay. Okay, so that actually does,
So this handles.
this condition is somewhat different than what you are allowed to do under your permit.
Right.
Okay. I just want to understand also, just to really clarify for us, the potential for the digester to be continue in upset and for you to be in violation of any district rule in terms of sulfur. The question is, introducing the fog back in, what's the potential that that could cause a future violation? I just want to understand, because I know right now you don't have the fog. There is a proposed condition that you have to be in compliance for at least 7 calendar days before you do so. What could happen once you start introducing the fog, so we understand?
With a healthy digester, and we will not reintroduce fog until we have a healthy digester, which is what we've done repeatedly in the past. If we take fog out, we make sure the digester is healthy, and then we reintroduce it slowly.
Does it make sense, this is my last question, does it make sense, because we as a board try to limit the length of our variances to what is actually necessary. Does it make sense, because you keep going back to a healthy digester, and that there are certain parameters, I know you mentioned alkalinity, et cetera. Would it make more sense to define being in final compliance for the end of the variance, to have those parameters for what would define a healthy digester?
In my opinion, that makes sense.
Okay, maybe we can, on a break, come up with what that might be, what those parameters might be, unless you know.
Well, we know, but I'd want to make sure that we consider the complete list. So we'll come up with that during a break.
Okay. Senator, do you have questions?
Well, thank you. Mr. McGraw, how long have you been the general manager at this site?
4 years. Oh, well, in August, it'll be 4 years.
4 years. Now, what about the efficiency of the digester? How do you know whether or not it's functioning properly?
We have regular testing that we do on some on a daily basis, some on a weekly basis, but by looking at those parameters which are prescribed in manuals for operating digesters, that's how we determine we have a healthy digester.
So it's in compliance is what you're saying. The digester is. The digester meets the requirements in the specification for its operation. Is that correct?
When it's a healthy digester and
Yeah,
it
was
meets
that,
those,
yeah.
yes, right.
Okay. And your byproduct is that, now, for example, the wastewater, if it's purified, it goes into the Santa Ana River.
That's correct. The liquid stream goes into the Santa Ana River.
And also Caltrans uses it.
And Caltrans uses it, that's correct.
Okay, you have the biosolids are used in composting.
Synagro hauls off the biosolids. One of the facilities, they have options on facilities to take it to, and they make those determinations where they're going to take it. But when Synagro hauls it away, they can go to composting or they can go to land application.
Agriculture.
Agriculture, yes.
And you also have the methane gas is used, generated by the treatment process, or burned in the ground flares. That's just waste. You don't use it for any heat transfer for any purpose.
It's not being beneficially used at this time, but the city's looking at plans to do that.
Now you talk about on item 8 of your petition, use the term preventative maintenance work order. That suggests to me that you have a reliability program in effect.
You said item 8? Oh.
The
That's
answer.
page 3 of the petition.
Okay. Okay, I have it now. I'm sorry, what is your question?
And you state here in your response to question 8 that your preventative maintenance work order or executed on schedule. What do you mean by that? That means, suggests to me you might have a reliability program in effect.
Okay, we have a program that, to the best of our ability, makes sure that the equipment remains in peak operating condition. And so a corrective maintenance work order is one where someone finds a problem and maybe on a rounds or something, and like a pump is not pumping, and so they'll issue a corrective maintenance work order, and maintenance will come and fix that. But then we have preventive maintenance work orders where on a scheduled basis, let's say you have to lube the pump quarterly, if that's what the manufacturer recommends. Then so we have a scheduled maintenance program to do the lubrication or whatever that check may be.
How's the pump used in the system?
Well, the pump is used for circulation of the digester. We have to keep it mixed. You want the bacteria that's in there to mix with the incoming food. So we use the pump to keep the two mixed together.
Okay, you state in your petition that your fog is delivered by truck to the site, correct? That's considering the fact that restaurants have a filter process at their site to collect the fog and deliver it to you, is that correct? That's your source?
The different restaurants, they have grease traps and there's different designs. I can't speak to those designs, but I can say that we get the fog and then we mix that in to the digester.
They're required by law to have that equipment at that site?
Yes.
Okay. Some of them are fishy, some of them are not.
Right.
I mean, there's no way of determining whether or not they're working properly or as they designed to the specs at the restaurant site.
No, we have no connection with the restaurant sites at all. So we.
Therefore, is it one to consider as a fact that some of this grease gets into the wastewater, notwithstanding whatever effort has been made to try and extract it? And when that happens, do you have any method to collect grease from the water that comes through your system?
Oh, yeah. The systems, as you point out, have systems they're designed, like the primary tank is designed specifically not only to capture the settable solids, but to capture the grease, which are floatable solids. And that goes to the digester.
So you feed that along with the schedule method to make sure that the digesters function properly?
The amount of grease that's coming in the water and that we collect off the surface of the water is a very small amount, and that's because of EPA requirements that there are very strong fog programs in effect to keep that out of the sewer. So in years gone by, the 70s, we had lots of grease coming down. It was significant. But once the EPA forced people to take that grease out of the sewer and truck it around to the treatment plants, we've seen in our flow stream, we see a much diminished amount of grease.
But you say you get a small amount. And if that small amount is dumped into the Santa Fe River, do anybody check at the river to find out whether or not it's been polluted?
We are required in our permit to check the river, but we have several opportunities to collect grease before we get to the river. In fact, one of the measures that we have in our NPDES permit is oil and grease in the water going to the river, and it has to be low, and we keep it low.
Goes to the river, you check it at the river site.
We check it, we walk the riverbanks, we're
All right,
required to.
did you check it for Caltrans before they?
Oh, yeah, we know what's in the water that we give to Caltrans, yes.
Okay, fine. Then you have, to try and get this back into balance and have a healthy digester, they use a dosage of ferrous chloride. You increased it, is that correct?
We increased it significantly, yes.
Right, well, on page 4, in answer to question 15, it just really used as much as 600 gallons. That's much more than you ordinarily required under normal circumstances.
That's correct.
How much more? What are you using? What amount is usually required?
Normally, we're down around 50 gallons or less. So when we had to increase to 600 and 800, that was totally abnormal, and we've not had to do that before.
And you talk about the concentration, the effectiveness of the ferrous chloride. If you stand by for a long period of time, it loses its effectiveness. Is that correct? You did say that, I believe.
Yeah. A chemical that sits, you begin to see separation and things like that.
But in this particular case, you had a fresh truckload come in and it still didn't have an effect.
Well, I believe the fresh truckload did
It
make a
says right here.
difference. Yeah.
Fresh truckload of ferrous chloride.
Yeah, and I do believe that
we
we still had to dose a lot because the digester was sick, but I do believe that the chemical was more effective.
The digest was very sick then, huh?
Yes.
You also talk about on page 5, item number 17, you're going to use all feasible measures to mitigate the situation. What do you mean? What are all feasible other than the ones you've already talked about?
Well, the ones we talked about are the all feasible methods. To do anything additional would require purchasing and bringing equipment on site. And we didn't, there's obviously no time for that.
That's the method you use for mitigating the problem until you get the digester healthy again.
Right.
So I guess that answers some of your other questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I had 2 other questions. One was, condition number 1, with regard to, it's a very kind of squishy, if I could use a non-technical word, condition that petitioner shall use its best efforts to correct the digester upset biological condition. Is it possible to hone that in a little bit and really make it a little more powerful? For example, petitioner shall use all tools necessary to correct the digester upset biological, including, and list some of them, the use of ferrous chloride, the cessation of fog deliveries. I know that there is a condition that has that, but that you could start under condition 3, accepting fog, and see that there's still an upset. So I'd like to see that fleshed out a little bit more, and if we can, again, come up with some wording for that over the break, when we have a break. And now I'm forgetting my other question. Did someone else? I thought, Mr. Camarena, you might have a question, if you want to ask.
This is something the chair brought up earlier this morning. To grant a variance, this board needs to find that the petitioner is in violation or will be in violation. Will be seems rather definite to me. Can you tell me that tomorrow or the next week you will be in violation?
It's a biological process that we have. I can't tell you a day or time because conditions are.
Excuse me, I interrupted you. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm not asking for a definite time. I'm not asking you for a crystal ball. I'm asking you, can you tell me that somewhere along the line you will be in violation?
The answer to that is no, I cannot tell you definitely that we will be in violation. With an upset stomach, we just don't know.
Unpredictable.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that reminds me of the question that I had, and that was, under the ex parte, which was granted at the end of April, one of the conditions was to monitor H2S. Have you found, from that date forward to today, any exceedances of H2S?
We stopped, on what day was the last time we? April 25th. The last day we violated was April 25th, and we've had a downward trend in our sulfur emissions since that time.
So where, if you don't mind, what are the readings? How much below 5? What is the?
Yesterday, we hit 1, and by the way, we do report these to the AQMD every day by email, but yesterday we were down to 1.0
1.0 pounds per day, that
pounds
is.
per day. That's correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Byrd, did you? And then the senator?
I know we're going round and round with this, but this is important to know whether or not we would issue a variance at all. So if it's down to 1, and that's down to 1 without accepting any fog.
That's correct. Without accepting any fog and using chemical intervention to make that happen.
Okay.
We would like to be in a position with a healthy digester that we can achieve that with minimal chemical dosing, not intervention.
Okay, so you're using dosing and intervention as two totally separate things because typically you're not using this amount of chemical.
That's correct.
But following up on that, we do agree that the health of the digester does not define a violation or non-violation of district rules. Is that correct?
It was our understanding that the digester as a process is in breakdown. That was our understanding.
That it continues to be in breakdown.
Yes.
So can you tell us what rule you believe that's a violation of?
For the rules that have been cited to us, 431.
We don't think it's a violation of a rule to be in breakdown. We think we're in an ongoing breakdown under Rule 430. And so we'd like the variance to extend to the point where we can confidently say we are no longer in breakdown.
Can you cite the subsection so that on a break I can, or the board can look that up?
I can tell you off the top of my head, it's Rule 430. Which particular subsection? I'm not sure there is a subsection that addresses that directly. I think it's more an interpretation of the rule that says what a breakdown is. And I mean, to be frank, breakdown has a very specific definition of a failure of equipment or an inadvertent fire. We don't have a failure of mechanical equipment per se. We have failure of a biological system, and that biological system is being reconstructed, but it is not yet back up to par.
Okay. I'm going to take a look at 430 during a break, but my understanding is 430 would define when a breakdown has to be called in, how long a breakdown lasts, the definition of a breakdown, but
Yep.
not that you continue to be in violation of district rules if you continue in breakdown.
I think you're right. It doesn't, a breakdown is an event that causes a violation of district rules, which is where we are. We have a breakdown. It has caused a violation of district rules. We don't know that it's not going to cause another one, so we would like the variance to extend to the point where we are confident that this is under control. And I was going to ask Mr. Menzel after the break, but I'll ask him now. If you refrained from putting fog in this digester in its current condition, could it still generate more hydrogen sulfide than expected and cause another exceedance?
The answer is yes.
And what conditions might cause that?
Again, it depends on the feed that it receives, either from the incoming wastewater or from the process, the activated sludge process, where we produce bacteria and feed those to the digester.
And those are factors that you have less control over than fog.
Correct.
And those are factors that have been continuing since April 25th, is that correct?
Yes, because we can't stop them. It's non-deferrable, so they're
Okay, but you've been
continuing
able to control it up till this point?
with chemical intervention.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll talk about this during deliberation at some point, but the issue with issuing a variance for something that either we're uncertain whether there is going to be a violation, and for a term that is longer than is necessary, is that then gives allowance for a violation, whereas there would not be before. So that's why we're very strict about that. Senator, you had a question before?
Right, on the proposed short variance, item number 3, you talk about daily emission of sulfur calculated H2O from the combustion of digester gases are maintained at less than or equal to 3 pounds per day. Is that a permitted condition? I looked at the permits, but I'm not sure.
The permit allows us 5 pounds per day. I'm sorry. We are in violation if we exceed 5 pounds per day. And this is saying we cannot have fog delivered until we've achieved less than 3 pounds or less for 7 days.
That still be within, if it's 4 pounds, it's still, or 5, you're within the permitted conditions, is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
If you have 4 pounds per day or 5 pounds per day, is that within the permitted conditions, yes or no?
5 is not, 4 is.
Okay, fine. So then they're giving you more stringent requirements that you have to meet. 3 pounds per day for a period of 7 days.
Before adding fog, that's correct. Yeah, it's a more stringent condition.
Can you meet that?
Oh, yes.
Fine, you can meet 3, you can meet 4, okay. Now, item number 4 of the short variance, you talk about they shall use ferrous chloride that pursuant to its product data sheet is labeled within a typical concentration of at least 10% ferrous iron. What do you mean by that?
Well, the manufacturer has standards that they manufacture by, and 10% is on the lower end of their range for providing a iron, in the solution, and 14% is what they target. And of course, they've done their studies to determine what's effective. And at 10%, if they go below 10%, it's not effective for us.
Will this degrade over a period of time, just on standby?
It can, yes. There are different factors that could cause that, but yes.
And how do you measure whether or not it's at least 10%, it could be less?
Well, what we do when the trucks deliver the ferrous, we always take a sample and we send that sample to our lab to measure the iron content, the iron and the chlorides content in the solution.
Have you discovered over a period of time while this product, ferrous chloride, is on standby, it degrades to be less than 10%?
It's not that it degrades to be less than 10%. You can have the iron coming out of solution, separation, stratification. You can have that happen.
So you can still reach your goal and objective as specified in this short variance?
We can meet this, yes.
How do you measure the quantity of a digestive gas? Is that measurement process is approved by the district?
Yes, the meter, we have a meter in line that we keep calibrated that measures the gas flow, much like the meters at all of our homes measures gas flow for natural gas. This is another form of natural gas, and we have meters that measure it.
Did the district participate in that approval of that process for measuring?
It's a permitted process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for this witness?
May I ask a few follow-up
Yeah,
questions?
Ms. Sue, go ahead.
Do you have the numbers of the daily H2S in front of you?
Yes.
And you had mentioned earlier that there's a general downward trend of the H2S levels, correct?
That's correct.
But sometimes there are spikes from the data, in the data?
Well, we haven't had any spikes. We've had a pretty steady downward, well,
So, for example, on April 30th, 2018, what was the hydrogen sulfide in pounds?
okay, April 30th? Okay. We had 300 parts per million.
Do you have that?
3.4 pounds.
Great. And on May 2nd, 2018, how many pounds per day?
I misunderstood. I thought you were talking parts per million. You were talking pounds. Yes, we do have occasional spikes in the poundage, yes.
Great. On May 2nd, 2018, how many pounds did you have that day?
Okay, May 2nd. Let's see here. Okay, we had 4.5 pounds.
And on May 8th, 2018, what level was that?
Okay. May 8th was 1.2 pounds.
And on May 9th, 2018, what was the number?
Oh, 2.6.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I can explain that spike is because our gas production increased. So you're measuring a lower concentration, but over a larger flow of gas.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Similarly, would you have records of how much ferrous chloride you're adding?
Yes, we do.
Can you tell us, even perhaps on those days that you've now told us the pounds per day, you told us that it's decreasing from the 600 pounds that you were placing in there when this first happened. Can you tell us, actually, tell us how it's decreased over time and what you're currently adding?
Okay. Currently, we're at about 100 gallons per day.
And remind us, that's about twice as much as your average of 50.
Right. Now, yesterday I did give them an instruction to cut it down to the average, 50. But we won't see until they take the reading today that it actually decreased.
So let's stop you there. So you're still experimenting at this point with removing the ferrous chloride, reducing it back down to average, and seeing what happens in the
Right,
digester?
yes.
Okay. Okay. I think it will be very helpful to know when we take a break what you define as the parameters for a healthy digester. Because I think that's really what we might be looking for.
Thank you.
Mr. Camarena?
So I think you told me that you measured, that you exceeded the 5 pounds limit on April 11th.
April 11th, that's correct.
When was when did you, before that day, when did you measure the pounds per day?
It was measured, the pounds per day were measured the 2 preceding days, that Monday and the 11th was a Wednesday, and it was measured on Monday and Tuesday before.
See, condition for your permit requires, I believe this is the one that applies, once a quarter. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. When did you start measuring it on a regular basis?
Well, that's that permit condition. There's another permit condition that says once a week.
Okay.
Okay, and so, but we've been measuring 3 times a week, and that's for process control. You can't wait until the quarter comes and take your sample and expect to be in compliance. You have to manage your process.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for this witness?
Would this be a good time for a break? Because
I
I'm going to
was
have some
just-
follow-up.
Yes, I was just going to say, we'll take a 15-minute break. Will that be sufficient?
I think that's fine. Thank
Okay, we'll take approximately 15 minutes. Let's try to reconvene by 10:35, and we'll come back with any additional witnesses.
Thank
at
you.
that time. Thank you. We're off the record. We're back on the record. Now, before we hear from the parties, we will in a moment hear from the parties with regard to any additional wording, language, conditions that the parties have come up with. I also wanted to just try to redefine how we proceed from here, because I think you're hearing from the members of the hearing board that there's one finding that is particularly troublesome to the board. And so perhaps we can hear all testimony on that finding and then have the board deliberate on that. We can then proceed from there if we need to. Let's start with, I don't know, who would like to present, Mr. McGaw or Ms. Hu, with regard to anything that the parties have come up with?
Yes, I'd be happy to, and thank you for the recess. It was productive. We were able to come up with some conditions indicative of a healthy digester, at which point we would no longer be concerned about having the variance, and the variance could terminate in the event that it gets granted in the first place. 4 conditions, physical conditions. One, the pH of the digester would be at 7.0 or higher. The second condition is that alkalinity would be at 2,500 milligrams per liter or greater. The volatile acids to alkalinity ratio would be in the range of 0.08 to 0.10, and the percent of carbon dioxide, CO2, would be 35% or less CO2 composition. And we would want to see these conditions persist for 30 days, which is a cycle of the digester, and that would be after we get the fog reintroduced to make sure the digester is in fact healthy.
Okay, at some point, we'll have to have those slower, but if we can have, sorry, I'm forgetting, Mr. Musel's testimony on the record with regard to those parameters being that of a healthy digester, we can take into consideration that condition. And that condition would be how we would key off the end of the variance. Is that what you are proposing?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Musel, if you can provide a little testimony on that.
Okay. We would like to see the conditions for a healthy digester being a pH of 7 or higher. Number 2, alkalinity of 2,500 milligrams per liter or greater. Volatile acids to alkalinity ratio of 0.08 to 0.10. Also, number 4 would be percent CO2 would be 35% or less, the balance being methane gas and a small percentage other gases.
And if you could just briefly restate what that would mean for the digester being in this healthy state in terms of potential exceedances of the sulfur H2S standard.
Okay. These are the signs of a healthy digester, and we need to establish this, and that's going to take, 30, 60 days, and we need to run it for 30 days, and then we would reintroduce the fog, and we would want to maintain that after reintroducing the fog. I'm sorry. So in terms of having an exceedance, again, I have to use the example of an upset stomach. We've had a severely upset stomach, and while we believe that in the condition that we're in right now, we won't have a violation, but you can eat the wrong thing. We feed it the wrong thing, or have the wrong, proportions of materials going in. For example, the example I gave earlier would be having an increase in our activated sludge that we have to waste away to maintain balance on the liquid side. If we increase that, then we could do okay, or we could have a problem. And that uncertainty is why we want the variance.
On the break that we just had, did you have an opportunity to revisit condition number 1 with regard to the term best efforts along the lines of what I had requested with regard to defining it more to using all the tools necessary to correct the upset and to list out those particular tools?
We didn't discuss that one specifically. I think that we felt that the other conditions covered those, and certainly the balance of what goes on out there. So from our standpoint, using best efforts is just one additional indicia that we're doing the best we can to keep this thing in balance. It's sort of a subjective standard, but that we're acknowledging, yes, we're working hard to keep this in balance.
Aside from condition number 3 with regard to the reintroduction of fog, there is no condition that requires the use of ferrous chloride in any amount to keep the digester or to keep the emissions at or below 5 pounds per day of H2S. What other conditions are you referring to with regard to the other conditions take into account all the tools?
Certainly setting a standard for the concentration of the ferrous, the fact that we're going to record and report the usage of these that we're going to be sampling. The difficulty I think we're having is that operating a digester is not a formula. It's not flip this switch and turn that button and read that value and you know what to do next. You have to watch trends, you have to understand the biology, you adjust the ferrous depending on what's going on in the digester. And what we're saying with condition 1 is that we're going to do everything we can, best efforts, but we're going to use our best efforts to keep it below 5 pounds, which means if it starts to go up, we'll add ferrous to keep it down. We do not want to be over 5 pounds. If we get through this and we haven't had an exceedance and the variance turns out to be unnecessary, we're perfectly happy with that. What we've got is an unhealthy digester, and it's not just fog. It can come from other sources in the influent to the plant. And until that digester is healthy, it could have an upset. We don't know because we can't control it. If it's healthy, we're not as concerned about it because it's capable of handling that kind of normal variability. But to try and say that we're going to dose ferrous at a particular rate is just...
Let me stop you there. First of all, we're getting into providing testimony, but my suggestion was not to put in a particular amount. My suggestion was merely to state more accurately that that you will not just use best efforts, but will use every tool available, including, and then to list those tools, those potential tools. And again, with the idea that we are in a very gray area, and as we'll perhaps hear more testimony on this, perhaps not, but the board will deliberate, but in a very gray area with regard to the first finding we need to make. And the more fleshed out that is, the more comfortable at least this board member is. That was why the request was made.
And I apologize for misunderstanding.
Okay. Anyone else have questions along the lines of what was just introduced? Senator.
We talked about everything. How do you feed the ferrous chloride or the fog into the digester or sludge? You feed sludge in also, right? How is that done? The sludge, the fog, the ferrous chloride, how is that fed into to obtain a balance in the digester?
Okay. We have to feed whatever comes into the wastewater plant, and And that just happens, the digester is a large tank, and we just have pumps that move it from the primary tank or the primary tanks to the digester. The ferrous tank, we have pumps that move it from the ferrous tank to the digester. And the same for the fog. And the balance is maintained by watching. Really, right now, the basic control that we have in terms of this permit is the addition of chemical. And when the digester is in good operating health, we need less of that chemical. And how do we judge how much chemical? Is we look at the concentration of hydrogen sulfide in the gas, and then we turn the pump up or we turn it down according to how well we're controlling the hydrogen sulfide in the gas. But in terms of the raw sludge, we have to pump what we get.
When you have excess in the digester, is there ever a time when the system is shut down or the digester stop operating?
Oh, and the digester has never stopped operating.
Okay.
Yeah, we can't do that. Yeah.
All right, fine. Well, then are the employees all happy around there?
The employees are very happy. Yep.
Well, if the feeds determine the feed into the digester sludge, ferrous chloride, and fog. We talked about fog being something that we have to correct with ferrous chloride if it's excessive. Now, you've been at this for 4 years. Some of the other operators have been there for a longer period of time. How do you titrate this stuff? I mean, I don't understand how at this point in time you are not be able to have an ideal flow rate for fog, ideal flow rate for sludge, based on how you know the digester is operating.
Well, and that's the problem with a wastewater treatment plant, whether it's this digester or whether it's in the liquid stream, we're subject to what comes down the sewer. And we don't have control over that. We can have a high flow today or low flow tomorrow.
The fog is not coming down the sewer.
But fog we can control, and we do control, yes.
That's right.
Yes.
And sludge,
We can't, that's what we get. It goes to the digester.
so the sludge then could be cause and effect to give a hiccup for the digester then,
Oh, yes.
because
Oh, yeah.
you control the fog.
There are lots of wastewater treatment plants that don't have any fog at all, no provisions for, and the manuals are written for them as well as for us for controlling a sick digester, and they don't have fog, but they have the variabilities that occur in the sewer.
What are the variabilities?
Well, meaning what chemicals, what waste are coming down the sewer.
Well, it seemed to me at this point in time, based on the discussion we've had, the rate of feed is a factor.
It is.
Yes,
It is a factor, yes.
and you do monitor the feed.
Oh, yes, we do. We monitor so that we can calculate the different loading parameters and so forth, but having control over them is another thing.
You monitor it, so therefore, if somebody falls asleep on the job, you're going to get a hiccup, you're going to get a shutdown.
We're not going to shut down. The
I mean, you're going to, the digester will not be functioning efficiently.
Well, that's the good thing about the digester is the fact that it does have such a long operating cycle
I understand.
that we can absorb some shock loads, but not if it's consistent, not if it's happening event after event after event.
What are the time frame for a shock load as you're explaining it?
Well, a shock load could happen in one day, depending on what industry upstream hits us. If that, I'm not speaking for Rialto specific, I'm just saying generally, you can have a shock load of something come into the facility. Or And that's very generally speaking. I'm just trying to explain to you that a shock load could be a one-day event or it could be a several-day event.
Could the human factor be a human be a factor? Could the human be a factor in determining the flow rate?
Not
Human
in,
error. Could human error be a factor?
not in determining the flow rate, no.
I mean, they make the adjustment. They got to monitor it. They did the feed. They're feeding it.
Right.
Yes or no?
Well, they are feeding it.
Right. Okay. Could it be a human error?
Well, so let's say that they don't turn the pump up. That means the solids are going to go to the liquid side instead of to the digester. But that's why we have the numbers going into our system and people reviewing the numbers.
The answer is that a human error could be a factor. Yes or no?
Yes, human error can be a
You
factor.
look in that area then, see what you can find.
Okay, we'll do that.
At this point, I'm going to ask Mr. McGaw, I think it would be fruitful if we focus just right now on that first finding. And if you have any other testimony or witnesses you wish to provide at this time on finding number one, which is that the petitioner for variance is or will be in violation of rule or regulation of the district.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
Mr. Mansell, there's been a lot of discussion about fog and controlling fog. But I think you've also said you don't have any control over what comes in through the municipal sewer system.
We don't on a day-to-day basis.
And it is certainly conceivable that with an upset digester, you might get something through the municipal side, unrelated to fog, that could upset the digester again. Is that right?
It's a possibility. I'm not saying it's highly probable, but it's a possibility.
And so would limiting fog indefinitely solve the issue of the digester being out of balance?
Not at all. As I pointed out a few minutes ago, there are plants that don't even accept fog, and they still have this problem.
Okay. And if this facility is going to accept fog, to do that, it needs to have a healthy digester operating with fog in it. Is that right?
A healthy digester, and then we add fog, and then keep it healthy.
And then keep
yes.
it, okay.
Right.
Which I think is what we
Right.
agreed were appropriate conditions, so.
Right.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Just, are these, I've just given you a list, and are these some of the tools that you would have available to control the generation of hydrogen sulfide in the digester, even in its unhealthy state?
Okay, tools available, monitoring, trending, tracking of performance parameters. That is very helpful. It's not going to control sulfur production, but it's helpful in knowing what's happening.
It is one of the tools you have available to you
Right.
that you use for controlling sulfur.
Yes. Yeah. But then chemical dosing and adjustments definitely help with maintaining sulfur to the best of our ability. I mean, as long as the digester is healthy. And then control of fog introduction definitely, and we've done that in the past when we've had a sick digester. We've taken fog out and then reintroduced it, Then wasting rates of solids, that is something that is controllable to a small extent. If we have to waste solids from the liquid side to maintain the proper balance there. So the process can be a little forgiving. Maybe I don't want to load the digester for a day or two, and I might be able to hold on to some solids in the activated sludge process, but I can't hold on, otherwise they end up going out the back end.
Not indefinitely.
No.
But it is,
Yeah.
but it would be one of the tools that you could use as part of your best efforts.
If the conditions are balanced and right in the other process, that's the problem.
Okay.
And that's why really we don't want to claim that because we don't know the conditions in the operating conditions on the liquid side.
Okay. We'll suggest those as tools that can be incorporated into the conditions of a short variance, subject to the discussion and approval with the district, of course.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. McCaw, at this time, I'm just going to ask if you have any other testimony you wish to, or evidence you wish to introduce in terms of finding number one.
I think we've done what we have and what we can, and we submit it to the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sue, I do actually, I wonder if you have a district witness, perhaps an inspector, who might be able to testify as to whether the facility is currently in in violation of any rules based on the testimony we have heard today and the evidence we've received, and whether they have been.
Could you please state your name and title for the hearing board?
My name is Frederick Chung, and I am a air quality inspector too, in our toxics division.
And could you please spell your name for the record?
My first name is Frederic, and last name is Chung.
And did you take the oath this morning?
Yes, I did.
And how long have you been an inspector with the district?
I've been an inspector with the district since April of 2015.
And when did you first learn of an exceedance at this facility?
I was informed of the exceedance on April. Let me take a look at my notes. It was April 17th, 2018.
And by exceedance, are we discussing the 5 pound per day sulfur emission limit at the facility?
That is correct.
And could you tell me what you discovered when you first learned of the exceedance? How did you first learn of the exceedance?
So I was assigned a notification, and that notification is notification number 510634, and it was for a breakdown investigation.
And what was the notification that you received?
The notification was that they had a sulfur exceedance. The description of the exceedance was permit number G25225 flare had an excessive emissions. The level, it was 6.7 on 417 and 7.7 on 416 and 5.4 on 411.
And did the facility explain the cause of this exceedance at the time?
So when I first arrived on site, we had an initial meeting where we discussed the incident itself of what occurred prior to and what led up to this exceedance.
And who did you speak to at the facility?
The people that were present was, there was the plant manager. His name was Marlon Brosco, and Clarence Mansell, the general manager, and there was, I believe it was Aaron Kraft, who is the assistant general manager.
And when you spoke to Mr. Mansell, what was the substance of your conversation?
Can you restate?
Oh, what was the substance of your conversation? What did you discuss with Mr. Mansell?
Oh, so we discussed, I wanted to get a background in regards to the plant itself, what led up to the exceedance, so what happened prior to to their knowledge of the exceedance, and I was also there on site to conduct an equipmentless inspection.
Okay, and what did Mr. Mansell say to you?
So Mr. Mansell stated that what led to the breakdown, he stated that there was a primary clarifier which had a blockage in one of the lines, and in order to address the issue, that they had to take down primary clarifier, and they had to divert the sewage that was coming through. They had to divert it from the primary clarifier and into the aeration basin. And through the course, that led to the upset of the digester that's in question.
Since the emergency variance was issued, have you been keeping track of the daily reported emissions at the facility?
So Mr. Mansell, he has been providing the daily results from the plant since that incident.
And since April 26, 2018, what was the highest pounds per day?
Since April 26th, the highest pounds per day was three, oh, sorry, 4.5 pounds.
4.5.
4.5 pounds of H2S.
Great. Thank you. No further questions at this time.
Mr. McGaw, do you have any questions for this witness?
No, thank you.
And I should ask Mr. Galante whether you have any questions for this witness.
Not of this witness, thank you.
And when we're done with this witness, I should go back to you and ask if you have any witnesses you wish to present in terms of finding number one with regard to whether the facility will be in violation.
Yes, as I initially expressed an interest, I would like to have the chief plant operator, Mr. Perna, Richard Perna, testify as to what has been testified here by Mr. Mansell.
Okay, then we will come back to you. Thank you. I have a question. Mr. Chung, okay, so in the situation where a breakdown is reported and there is an exceedance, but the exceedance is fixed, but the underlying breakdown condition is not. Is that something that you as an inspector or the district would cite as a continuing violation, i.e. the breakdown itself, but no exceedance of any rule, regulation, no violations of any standards?
So based on if there wouldn't be a violation issued if they are in compliance with their permit condition. So based on their permit condition, their permit limit is 5 pounds per day, and the results that they've provided, since they are below that 5 pounds per day, the facility wouldn't be in continued violation per their permit condition.
Okay. And one other question. The 4.5 pounds that you cited as the highest amount, that was on May 2nd?
That is correct.
Okay. And since that time, do you know, has there been any situation or any time since then where it's been close to that amount or above 4?
The next, so this was on May 1st, they had a result of 4.2, and then on May 2nd, they had a result of 4.5, and 4.5 was, I believe, the closest that it got to 5 pounds.
Do you know whether it was above 4 pounds any other day, aside from those two that you just, since the 25th of?
Per the results that they reported, so other than April 26th, May 1st, and May 2nd, those were the only results that were above 4.
And
Those were the only results that were provided to us where it was above 4.
and if you can refresh our recollection, was April 26th above 5?
No,
No.
April 26th was 4.6.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Chung? Senator?
You mentioned a primary clarifier. That malfunctioned, I think you say that. And what extent did it have an effect on the digester? You may have mentioned it, but will you repeat it, please?
So, when I asked Mr. Mansell what led to this exceedance, Mr. Mansell, he provided information that they had a blockage in one of the pipe that's in primary clarifier, and due to that, they had to take primary clarifier down so that they can address the blockage in that piping system.
How did it affect the exceedance at that point in time? Did it give you a number?
The only numbers that were reported to us was based off the notification and the data that they provided.
So they didn't provide a number at that time, even though the primary clarifier was not operating, and was taken out of service, it exceeded the 5 pounds per day.
So the only data that that was provided to us was let me pull that data. So the only data that we had was for data that was taken on April 4th, April 6th, April 9th, April 11th, April 13th, April 16th, April 17th, April 18th, 19th, and 20th. Those are the only dates that was provided to us. But based off the initial notification that was provided, where the exceedances was for April 11th, 16th, and I believe the 17th. Yeah, it was April 11th, April 16th, and April 17th, which was initially stated in the notification 510634.
Okay. When the primary clarifier was out of service, what was the time frame there? When did that happen?
Mr. Mansell stated that the primary clarifier was taken down on February 22nd of 2018, and it wasn't brought back online till, let's see here, till March 30th of 2018.
So they did not give you a reading, even though it was back online. March, was that March 11th or April 11th?
So the primary clarifier was brought back online on March 30th, 2018. That was the information that was provided to me.
So during your time it was out of service, they didn't give you any numbers.
That, yes, I did not have those numbers.
They did not give you any numbers. You want to repeat that?
So we didn't receive any numbers during that time.
When you review as the inspector all the time frames before and after the primary clarifier was in and out of service, did they cause you any concern?
I was not aware of that at that time, during that time. The first, our first, where it was brought to our attention, or to my attention, was April 17th was when I was notified of this exceedance.
So the next question could be, did they tell you how often this primary clarifier is out of service, out of use? Has it happened before? What is the history of it, the failure rate? Did they tell you anything about that?
That I do not know.
Thank you.
Mr. Camarena.
Maybe two questions. You did not issue a notice of violation?
The most recent notice of violation that I've provided to this facility was on Friday of last week, and that was for the permit condition. So the exceedance of the 5 pounds per day permit condition. Prior to that, I have not issued anything. I personally have not issued any notice of violations.
The notice of violation you issued cited the exceedance of the 5 pound per day limit for which days?
So the notice of violation, the date of violation was noted for April 11th incident.
No other? No other?
So that was the initial date of the notice of violation, but then there wasn't a secondary notice of violation that was noted.
Okay, thank you, that's enough.
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
So the thing was, the notice of violation that was issued was for that initial exceedance and so that's pretty much the violation itself was stating that because they exceeded that 5 pounds per day, that's what that notice of violation was for.
You mentioned a secondary notice of violation. I've not heard of that.
So, there wasn't any other any other notice of violations that followed since. That's what I meant.
Okay. And the reason why the 16th and the 17th of April were not part of the notice of violation is because of the breakdown report that was filed on?
No, so the thing is, it would have also been included for that initial one. So on the actual report, the report would be including those other dates.
Okay. And do you consider, so I think you answered this question, do you consider the facility to currently be in violation?
Currently, the facility is not in violation. due to the fact that the levels are below the 5 pounds per day.
Okay, so when you speak about the notice of violation that you did issue, that was for the 11th, and that was the initial violation, and that the 16th and the 17th you consider to be part of that initial violation, but that violation has since been cured in your mind, is that correct?
As of the 26th of April is when their levels have fallen below the 5 pounds per day.
And in order for them to be in violation again, there would need to be an exceedance of the 5 pounds per day of sulfur.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Byrd?
I just wanted to confirm something. You mentioned, the senator was asking you about numbers that were not provided. Were there any required information, any data that was required under permit or by you upon request that was not provided to you when the clarifier was out of service?
At the time of my inspection, I did not request for any data for those months that the senator was asking.
So there were no violations other than this violation of 411 by the facility at all? I mean, that's the only NLV that was issued. So you're saying that that NLV covered everything and there were no other issues that required reporting that were not reported? It may not make sense. I'm just trying to clear up what I think might be a misunderstanding.
So currently, pertaining to the breakdown notification, the only notice of violation that we addressed was for this particular one. And that's the only one that's been stated. I'm not sure if there would be any more that would be following.
And the data that's received that gives you the pounds per day, you have received all of that information from the facility as appropriate?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think at this time, is there any other questions? Senator, do you have a question for this witness?
The permitted conditions, aren't they required to take readings weekly or daily, or what's the requirement?
So the permit condition, let me pull that out. So the permit condition in regards to the, where it states the 5 pounds per day, the permit condition states that, so they need to test that at least once per quarter. And that's stated on the permit number G5 or G25225, and that's condition number 4. And that's where it states that it needs to be tested at least once per quarter. The facility also tests more frequently, and so per the data that's been presented to us, those are the numbers that we noted on our report.
Thank you.
Ms. Sue, do you have any other witnesses that you wish to present on the finding number 1 with regard to will be in violation?
Madam Chair, before we leave Mr. Chung, may I ask him just a couple of
Yes.
quick questions.
Sorry, yes, Mr. McCall, you may.
Just to make sure the record's clear, because there was a little qualification. Mr. Chung, when you visited the plant on the first day, when you were initially notified, did you not receive any information that you asked for on that day?
The information that I asked for from Mr. Mansell, the data was provided to me that day.
And
Those were the ones that I specifically asked. Those data was provided by Mr. Mansell.
okay. And since the day of that initial notification, have you asked for anything from the wastewater treatment plant information-wise that you have not received?
No, I have not.
So you have received everything you've requested.
That is correct.
And although the clarifier was out of service for a period of time, to the best of your knowledge, there were no exceedances of the 5 pound per day while the clarifier was out of service, correct?
To the data that was provided to me, that is correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Sue, any other witnesses on that particular finding?
No further witnesses from the district.
Then I'm going to allow Mr. Galante. You had a witness that you wish to present. If we can limit at this time the testimony to anything additional or confirming that you'd like to present on that finding number 1 with regard to will be in violation of any district rule.
That is fine, thank you. I will keep it brief. I would request Richard Perna, the chief plant operator, to approach. Maybe right.
And Mr. Galante, if you can have the witness states and spell his name for the record and also indicate whether you took the oath today, sir, and your title.
Yes, if you could state your name, title, and confirm whether or not you took the oath this morning.
Okay, my name is Richard Perna. That's R-I-C-H-A-R-D. Perna is P-E-R-N-A. I'm the chief plant operator of record at the Rialto wastewater facility. I did not take the oath only because I didn't expect to be a witness, but I'm glad to do so now.
That's fine, so let's swear you in. If you don't mind rising, and
Of course.
if you raise your right hand, do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Galante.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Perna, who was the plant manager at the time of the exceedance that has been the subject of the testimony today?
I was the plant manager. However, I had had a pre-planned vacation, which began on April 19th. So I was on site on April 11th when we had the first exceedance.
And when did you become aware of that exceedance, the first exceedance?
The first notice I received that there was concern was on April 10th, when we had a compliant value in H2S, but it was higher than normal, and so we took appropriate steps. I then learned of the exceedance on the 11th, I believe it was on the 16th, because they hadn't done a mathematical calculation.
So the 16th is of April is the first time you became aware of the exceedance?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you hear Mr. Mansell's testimony this morning?
Yes, I did.
Do you agree with the items he testified to, or have any different testimony based on your observation and management as the plant manager?
No, I agree completely with what Mr. Mansell stated. I believe it's accurate.
Are you aware of any other equipment failures at the plant, such as ferrous chloride system, that could have contributed to the exceedance?
During the increased ferric feed, we did have issues that were addressed immediately with some of the ferric feed pumps. The records that I believe have been provided indicate what those repairs were. Otherwise, I don't know of any others.
So your testimony is all those repairs have been made?
Yes,
Those
they were made very promptly.
That concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sue, do you have any questions for Mr. Perna?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Perna, could you tell us your opinion with regard to what the likelihood is that moving forward from here, that there will be any exceedances of the sulfur standard or limit?
As Mr. Mansell has stated, and I agree with it, at this time, while the digester is compliant with the H2S standard, the digester is not stable. We're adding chemical to maintain stability. Normal operation, which includes a measured amount of fog, fats, oils, and grease, is not being fed. And as Mr. Mansell stated, that's a fuel, if you will, for digester operation. So is there a chance that it could exceed, I believe is your question, is that correct?
It's more what's in your idea, what in your estimation, what's the likelihood? So let's take it one step at a time. What's the likelihood? I know one of the things you're doing is reducing, as of today, the amount of ferrous chloride by half, back to the average amount. What's the likelihood that that would cause an exceedance of the sulfur limit?
I don't know that I can apply a percentage, but every time you make a change to a biologic process, and the digester is a biologic process, there is potential for exceedance.
Is it more likely than not?
I would say it's more likely, yes.
More likely than not that there would be an upset
Yes.
that could cause, or that would cause
Yes.
an exceedance. And similarly, once you start adding, I see that the condition as it's stated, and maybe it should be stated differently, the current condition that is proposed, number 3, is not to reintroduce fog until the sulfur is 3 pounds or less for a period of 7 days. But I do recall, Mr. Mansell, this is going to be very compound, so let me take it in
Okay.
little doses. Mr. Mansell, that he had testified that fog should not be a problem so long as the digester is healthy. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
Okay, so is it a good idea to introduce fog after 7 calendar days of sulfur being 3 pounds per day or less? Or is it a better idea? We heard some parameters of pH, alkalinity, a ratio with regard to volatile acids to alkalinity, and one other parameter, which I can't even read my notes, percentage of CO2, I believe. Would that be a better condition with regard to the reintroduction of fog?
The tools and the conditions, I completely agree with. These are the ones that we would want to see in place. Addition of fog is going to cause a change in operation. My personal opinion is that the potential for an exceedance definitely exists when you make a change.
Okay, let's just start with the first question, which is a better indication of when fog should be introduced? Is it just because sulfur is below 3 pounds for 7 days, or because it's a healthy digester?
First, as we're in an upset condition now, until we achieve stability, I would not recommend feeding fog. as a parameter and a way to decide when it's acceptable, the 3 pound per day for at least 7 calendar days seems reasonable.
Reasonable. So what is the likelihood if you were to, after 7 days of 3 pounds or less of sulfur, we're taking that now, you introduce fog? What's the likelihood in your estimation? And we can define it as more probable than not, or more likely than not, of an exceedance of sulfur.
We would, once we achieve stability and are ready to feed fog, we would certainly feed it at a much lower rate and monitor how the digester functions to bring it up to what we know from past practice is reasonable for this digester. So it would be a stepwise process, feed, monitor, feed, monitor.
I'm sorry, and did you say whether it's what's the likelihood of an exceedance?
Likelihood of exceedance, I have to admit there is certainly one there. If we monitor correctly and we do our jobs right, we would not have an exceedance. That's the ideal case. That's what we go for. We don't want to have exceedances.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Camarena.
Typically, what is the length of time to achieve stability?
As Mr. Mansell stated, it tends to go in 30-day increments. Every time you make a change, the biology has to restabilize. So I know we've been talking 30, 60, 90-day is what we're ideally hoping for. That's not unreasonable to bring the digester back into full stability with some fog feed.
And without fog feed?
Without fog feed, it would be more rapid. From today, I don't know that I can, it's not a mathematical thing, it's a biology. I would say 60 days.
But the fog was stopped some time ago, wasn't it?
The fog was ceased 16th, I believe, of April. Sorry.
So you subtract those days from the 60?
What I'm stating is that we know that the digester is not stable now. And yes, fog was stopped on April 16th, but we still haven't achieved stability. And that's what I think I was answering your question, which was how long would it take for the digester to be, in my opinion, stable from today?
Okay, I understand. What's the likelihood of going over the 5 pound limit tomorrow?
For tomorrow, I would say it's low.
If there's no feeding of fog for 90 days, on that 90th day, what's the likelihood of going over 5 pounds?
Because while fog is a factor in in feeding of the digester, there is solids that are fed from the collection system, and that solids volume rises, falls, its volatility rises and falls, its constituents rise and fall. That's normal operation. If we don't get any unreasonable weather conditions or discharges out of our control, the chances of having an exceedance in the 90th day or in the next, over the 90-day period, I would say are probably low, although I have to qualify that. Because we're readjusting chemical feeds back to routine operation, that could cause an exceedance. So there's multiple factors that relate to digester stability. chemical feed, organics load that's being fed, fog, if we allow fog in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Byrd?
Mr. Cerner, how long have you worked for the City of Rialto wastewater?
I've worked for Veolia since 1985, but have been at the Rialto project since late May of last year.
Okay, so a shorter period of time than
A lot shorter, yes.
the previous gentleman. So you wouldn't know, sometimes we get facilities that change names. You wouldn't know if there was ever a variance requested under a different name for this facility, would you?
I do not know of another variance, to the best of my knowledge.
Well, right now, this is the only one that I see, but sometimes, like I said, names change of facilities, and so numbers start over. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator, do you have questions?
All right. You were saying in your testimony that you feed and you monitor. What are you feeding?
You would, without fog, let's put fog aside for the moment, you're feeding solids from the treatment process that the wastewater treatment process removes from the wastewater coming in, or sludge is the generic term for it.
You're feeding sludge
Yes, sir.
and you monitor.
Yes, sir.
At what point you start to put in more ferrous chlorides?
That is, we're monitoring how the digester is reacting, and we're monitoring the sulfides level, the H2S level. And so if that begins to rise because of variations in, normal variations will raise the ferrous feed.
What do you mean rise? You saying something, it rise, sulfur rises.
Okay. As, again, just to re-verify what Mr. Mansell said, the digester is a biologic process.
I understand all that.
Okay. When the process changes normal variation, you're going to get a rise in what will ultimately be H2S levels.
How do you know?
We measure it.
And what do you measure so far? When you measure it, at any time during that period, did it exceed 5 pounds per day?
No, sir, it did not. It stayed stable. And we measure 2 to 3 times a week.
As you feed, you're still measuring.
Yes, that's our normal process, is to measure approximately 3 times a week.
Not quarterly, but 3 times a week.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now when you begin to say, well, the digester is operating okay, let's feed some fog in. And you measure accordingly 3 times a week?
Yes, sir. We continue to measure the same. Yes.
Did you ever at any time exceed the 5 pounds per day during that process?
No, sir.
All right. What about when you put in when you had a failure of the primary clarifier?
We had no problems with the digester. We had no exceedance of H2S levels.
Not at all. How often did the primary clarifier fail?
This is the first time in my year there. In late August, we did take this primary clarifier offline for a different purpose. It was off for 2 or 3 days. This was a longer, as Mr. Chung said, it was offline from February 21st through March 30th. That's the first time in my experience that that particular primary clarifier had been taken offline.
So what I'm understanding based on all the testimony, that you've always been in compliance, except for the 11th.
In my time at the project, yes, I know there have been exceedances in the past. I don't have the details of what dates, but it's, I believe, at least 2 years, if not longer than that.
2 years ago.
Yes.
Do you know whether or not they were reported to the district?
I believe it has. I couldn't really, I don't have access to that particular data, but
So-
I know people within, at the plant do.
To your knowledge, there's no evidence that the district took any action, notwithstanding the fact that you had these exceedings?
I really can't testify to that. I really don't have that information as to what the district might have done or what the reporting was. I believe all exceedances have been reported.
You believe that?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
What evidence you have? I mean, the report is in writing sometime, right?
Yeah, it would be in writing, and I know our normal procedures, and we do not hide information. We're not going to hold anything back. That is a standard. And so it's a presumption, but the presumption is that it was reported every time.
You've been there for a year, so you wouldn't really know, but you're guessing at it. That's okay.
Yeah, I can, you've asked me to, to speculate, and
I understand.
but I know what Veolia policy is. And Veolia policy is always to report.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, if there are any other questions for this witness? Mr. Glante?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one final follow-up question. I believe you testified, Mr. Perna, that on the 16th was when you stopped introducing fog to the plant?
Yeah.
So you became aware of the potential issue on the 10th. What occurred between the 10th and the 16th?
The H2S levels dropped after on the 10th, we had a high but compliant number. The 11th was an exceedance. Subsequent testing, the H2S level went back down into compliance range. We assumed that it was a blip on the 16th when we did get an indication that things were worse than we had thought. That's when we stopped fog.
And that was on the 16th?
I believe so, yes.
When you learned that it was worse than you
Yes.
thought? And between the 10th and the 16th, what type of measures were you taking to analyze the issue?
We continued analysis. We increased the ferrous chloride dosage twice, first on the 10th and then again on the 11th, to try to compensate, to bring the facility back. Again, this is past practice, and it has been effective in the past.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
And Mr. Perna, just for the record, this is a facility that is owned by a public agency, is that correct?
Yes.
And it is an essential public service in that it's wastewater treatment,
Yes.
sewage treatment.
Yes.
Thank you. I had hoped to have us deliberate at least on the first issue, but I think we're getting way overdue on a lunch break. And so what I'd like to do at this time is ask board members, is there any other finding, other than finding number one, on which any board member would like to hear additional testimony, on which any board member would not be able to make the finding, is kind of what I should say. Senator? Okay, and me either.
Madam Chair?
Yes,
Before
Mr.
we
McCall.
break, because it came up, may I invite Mr. Mansell back up to just address the question about whether there have been past violations? I just want the record to be clear that there have not been, and perhaps Mr. Perna was mistaken about that, but I'd like Mr. Mansell to. Senator Holden is waving, saying, never mind, saying, oh,
Okay.
right, with that, if,
Are we talking about an extended
no, it would be
2 questions?
two, maybe even one.
I would like to
Yes.
hear it.
All right.
Okay, why don't we do that, and then, board members, what's your pleasure? We don't like to deliberate on an empty stomach. We make the best decisions when we're not. However, it seems that we are nearing an end of what we would need to hear as testimony. Would we like to hear this, accept public comment, hear closing, and deliberate, or would we like to take our lunch break and deliberate? And
I would like to deliberate on finding number 1
okay.
and then take it from there.
Okay. All right, so let's hear quickly on that issue from Mr. Mansell, and then we'll proceed before lunch.
Very quickly. Mr. Mansell, how long have you been at the Rialto wastewater treatment plant?
For 4 years, this coming August.
Okay. And but during that 4-year period, until the April exceedance that was discovered on April 16th, that it occurred on April 11th, at any time before that, had there been an exceedance of the hydrogen sulfide level at that wastewater treatment plant?
Not during the time that I've been there, and at the time that this happened, and in consultation with district staff, we discussed the history, and they found no history of violations prior.
And just very quickly for Board Member Byrd, has this permit always been in the name of the city of Rialto, to your understanding?
Always in the name of the city of Rialto.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Sue, any questions on that line of
No.
testimony? Anyone else? Questions on that line of testimony? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So at this time, I think we will ask if there's any member of the public who wishes to be heard. I think this would be a good time, even if it's not just on the first finding. And seeing no one, I'm going to ask then if Mr. McGaugh, if you'd like to give any kind of closing, and in particular, really with regard to the first finding.
Thank you, and I appreciate the guidance from the board. I think we did discuss it to the extent we can previously, that we are not out of compliance. We hope to not be out of compliance going forward. We are going to take every step we can, but we are faced right now with a broken digester that is getting healthy. And as long as that condition exists, there remains an increased potential for another exceedance of the 5 pounds per day. And under those circumstances, particularly in light of the conditions that will require us to take all measures available to us to assure that that does not happen, nonetheless, it might happen due to measures beyond our control, conditions beyond our control. And for those reasons, we would ask that the board issue a variance under those limited circumstances where something happens that we can't control. We'd like that acknowledged that we do still have a sick digester.
Thank you. And Ms. Sue, I understand that the district need not take any position other than not to oppose. But if you do have a position with regard to finding number 1, we would like to hear it, I think.
The facility is put in a difficult position of having to show that it will violate, but also having to reduce excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible. The facility is back in compliance with its 5 pound per day sulfur emissions limits. However, the facility's witness, Mr. Mansell, testified from one day to the next, the emissions can vary by more than 1 pound. Based on this, I believe that there is enough evidence for the board to determine that the facility will more likely than not violate.
Thank you very much. Board members, would anyone like to begin? Mr. Camarena.
The first finding that we have to make, this hearing board needs to make all 6 findings specified in the Health and Safety Code in order to grant a variance. Must make each one of them. In the first one, it says, Health and Safety Code says that we must find that the petitioner for a variance is or will be in violation. And then it goes on. We've been quite strict in interpreting the will be portion. We've applied it in situations where a petitioner will be in violation very definitely when, in order to do maintenance, must disconnect a piece of equipment that is required by the permit to be connected to another piece of equipment. And even though that piece of equipment that's going to be disconnected, it'll temporarily be replaced by another piece of control equipment so that the net effect is no emissions to the atmosphere, but nevertheless, it's a violation of the permit requirement. So those are the kinds of things where we apply the will be, where we know it will be in violation. What we've heard is that there is a possibility, and I agree, there is a possibility that it will be in violation, but it's not likely. Mr. Mansell testified that he cannot say that it will be in violation. He further testified in response to a question from counsel that it is not highly probable. Mr. Perna pointed out that repairs have been made, that the potential for an exceedance is present, but also that he could not testify that tomorrow or the 90th day that it's highly probable that there would be a violation. He said it could be, and I agree, but I don't think that the burden of that petitioner has satisfied the burden to my way of thinking.
I think this is a very tough one, and I think it's very tough for the reasons that you stated. And I think up until the very, very, very end, and in particular Ms. Sue's closing remarks, definitely was leaning towards, while meritorious, and while, of course, this is an essential public service, the point being, variance just didn't seem to be required. But Ms. Sue made a very good point that's got me thinking, perhaps pulling me on to the other side, and that is, as all facilities, this facility needs to balance these findings that we need to make and requirements we have, and in particular, reducing excess emissions to the maximum extent feasible. So were this facility to not have poured 600 pounds of ferrous chloride into this digester when it needed to in order to reduce those sulfur levels, were it not currently, well, I guess maybe not currently, because I think we heard that just today they're going back to average, but just until today, at double the amount of average, then they would be more likely than not in actual violation. And it seems to be, and I think Mr. Mansell was trying to bring this out during his testimony. Were they not dumping the chemicals in? Were they not doing these things to try and reduce it, that in fact they would be in violation? And then we wouldn't be questioning whether or not they should be getting a variance for that very reason, which sort of puts them into a catch-22. And so, well, that's something important that I really hadn't been considering. I think they've been asking us to consider it, but until it was stated in those terms, I'm not sure I was quite getting it. And so with that, I'm not sure where I lean. I wanted to hear what others thought of that. But I would like to see for sure the period of the variance and the best efforts clause much more strongly stated. Because there is a real danger of granting a variance where there is no violation or will not, more likely than not, and here it's not even more likely than not, it's stated will be. And that is because we're now granting permission to do something that they would not otherwise be able to do, which is to violate the standard. So I'm still concerned about it for those reasons. Anyone else wish? Mr. Camarena, you wish to respond to that?
Yes, petitioner indeed has done everything possible, at least to my knowledge, that to keep the facility, to reduce the excess emissions, and indeed has achieved that. But those actions are the same actions that we require of every other petitioner, and that is to do everything possible to reduce excess emissions, whether variance is granted or not. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't change my view that while a violation is possible, it's not likely. It's not likely tomorrow. And if they continue doing what they should be doing, it's not likely 90 days from now.
Another really good point, and raises for me, looking at our findings we need to make, that the legislature in making these findings really favored not granting a variance where possible. And in that case, in finding number 4, it's we don't grant variances if a facility can curtail in lieu of a variance. Now here, the curtailment is not really an option because that waste stream is coming. But it's very similar, along the same lines of, well, if they can continue to add ferrous chloride or continue to not introduce fog until they've reached a healthy digester, they're still not out of violation, and we would expect that. So that's a very good point. Ms. Byrd.
I can't say that I can make the first finding. Even if all I went by was the statement that was offered up, and that was, it's more likely than not, or it's possible, or I can't remember exactly what was said, because that's not what the first finding says. And I don't want to be, nitpicky, but the first finding says that you will be in violation. I believe testimony, at least I can find Mr. Perna's testimony, says more likely than not there will be an exceedance, but that's not a given. And as Mr. Camarena pointed out, there are certain processes and procedures that they can take to probably prevent that from happening, as was mentioned. So I can't, I don't see how we can say there will be when we haven't had anything, even the testimony of the petitioner that says they will be. And I know it's a catch-22, but I don't think we have any evidence in testimony or evidence that would say that they will be in violation.
And I would add to that, in fact, the evidence seems to be pointing in the opposite direction. We've heard testimony and evidence as to what caused this in the first place. And in time, that happened a while ago. And so we would expect that it would only get better over time. And in fact, we heard testimony that the trend is less ferrous chloride. The trend is lower sulfur levels, with the exception of a couple of spikes, but that did not get over 5 pounds since the 26th of April. And so while it is true, and we've heard lots of testimony that you don't know what you're getting in that waste stream, that's been true since this initial upset occurred, and we haven't seen very many exceedances, or any since a while back. Ms. Byrd, did you?
I just wanted to say, and not that we would want that, but they came for an emergency variance before. That's like a last option available if it reached that point.
Senator, did you have to add?
You did a good job. You don't need a variance. And you can't make the first finding because you're not in violation, nor will be in violation based on the troubleshooting you're doing and how well you're monitoring the operation. I can only therefore suggest that keep doing what you're doing, and if it gets real close, the district will find out because you reported to the district. At that point in time, I guess, whatever the appropriate action to be taken beyond that point in time, you will take. But as of today, you're in good shape. Pat yourself on the back, and we'll see you next time.
Anyone else? Would anyone like to make a motion? Mr. Camarena?
I move that in the matter of City of Rialto and Veolia Water District Operating Services, case number 6105-1, that we deny the request for a short variance for lack of showing that the petitioner is or will be in violation.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Senator, how do you vote? I vote yes. Ms. Byrd votes?
Yes.
And
Yes.
motion passes 4-0. And again, this is one of those rare cases where it is a meritorious matter. That's why the ex parte emergency was granted in the first place, and that the facilities are doing a good job. And thus, the board does not believe that you will be in violation. However, as Ms. Byrd stated, if another upset condition were to occur, the facility always has the ability to come and petition again for an emergency, were that to be necessary.
Thank you. And on behalf of Veolia, and I'm sure the city as well, thank you for your listening and for your attention. I understand your deliberations, and I can assure you these gentlemen are going to do everything they can to not appear before you again. Thank you.
And just to leave for the record, just so that it does not appear that it is difficult to get meritorious variances from this board, just to explain once again the reasons why. And that is, if there is not likely or there will not definitely be a violation, but yet this board does grant a variance, that's sort of an allowance, especially for something as long as 90 days, to allow something that it doesn't seem will likely happen in any event. And so that could cause more issues than it would solve.
Thank you.
So thank you all. Any other business, board members? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all for your good testimony.